Good morning, and thank you very much for listening to my speech today. I really think that there have been very few times in my life that I've been interpreted into so many languages at once, and so this is a big deal for me. And so I wanted to share a bit of the background of what I went through in regards to this issue of the fight against corruption. I'm an attorney. I was a criminal litigator for over 18 years of my life, and I defended clients and companies before the courts regarding white-collar offenses here in Peru. And technically, I was a corrupter. In Peru and in many other Latin American countries and countries throughout the world, justice is available to the highest bidder, not just when people are right, but even when they are not right. And an attempt is made to assure a successful outcome for a client. So I remember what happened that got me out of this way of being. I was in Lima here, making calls, checking on my cases. I had an assistant who was in charge of keeping track of my cases on a day-to-day basis, and I would ask how cases were coming along by phone. At that time, I was defending a young person who had been in a fight at a bar and who was innocent of what he was being accused of, but nonetheless, the first judge convicted him for assault. And we were appealing, and we had to ensure that we would get a favorable outcome for my client. And at that time, I had contacts within the justice system who would put me in touch with judges to be able to pay them and ensure these kinds of results. At that point, the case was over and we were just waiting on the final ruling. I called my assistant and I asked about the case and how it was going. She told me that we had lost this case, despite the fact that I had already given one of the judges money to rule in my favor. And that created a great deal of stress for me because as an attorney, I was a winner. I never lost cases. And basically, I wouldn't lose cases because I had money and good contacts to pay judges off. And so I was so surprised. I was feeling physical symptoms. My head was throbbing, and I started to ask myself, how could I have lost a case? And so I called my contact to complain. I had two cell phones for this. I only have one cell phone now. But previously, I had a cell phone in my own name, like this one, and a different cell phone in someone else's name for those sorts of calls, because you can understand that it was not a simple thing to make this kind of a phone call regarding corruption over my regular phone, because those phones can be tapped. And so I took the phone and called my contact, the person who was helping to connect me to judges, and I complained and I said, "What's going on here? Why did we lose?" And he would say to me, "Well, this can't be. There must be some explanation." He called the judge who I had paid off. And then after 5 minutes, we were able to get back in touch. And he said, "Look, apparently there's been some pressure by the opposing party and they've paid more." And we lost. And so I started to complain and I said, "How is this possible? I thought we had a deal. What am I going to do now? What do I say to my client? We've lost, despite the fact that he has given me money to give to them to ensure this result." And so, long story short, he said, "Look," he says, he apologizes, "This won't happen again. And if you want, the money you've paid can be applied as a credit for the next case that you have before that court." And so that was an offer that I wasn't interested in. I wanted to win that case. And I said, that's not how this works. There is a code between us. We're operating here among gentlemen. This is impossible for me to accept. And when I said that last sentence, when I said, we're here among gentlemen, I became aware of reality. It was like a bolt, like a slap across the face, and I awoke, saying, we're working as gentlemen, when really we were working as corruptors, as criminals who were corrupting the justice system. And so at that time, I hung up the phone. I sat down because I was on a park bench, and I said, it's time to get out of this. And that's when I decided to get out of that corrupt life. I wrote a book, which is called El Cerebro Corrupto, The Corrupt Brain, which has been a small success here in Lima. And a sort of process of transformation and reinvention began then. And so the question I asked myself is, how do I bring about this transformation I want to see? The hardest decision was leaving my professional practice. I left my law firm. I referred my clients out to other attorneys, and I quit. I used to wear a jacket and a tie and had my hair different. Not anymore. I used to have a BMW, which I sold. I now have an older car, a 68 classic car. And so I truly woke up to the life that I had always wanted. And I left my office, I left my firm. From that moment on, I stopped litigating. I'm no longer a trial attorney. I don't take cases because the Peruvian and Latin American justice system, from what I know from my research, is an eminently corrupt system where there isn't equality under law, and rulings are bought through money or through influence. And I had a very hard time after leaving this profession, because the million-dollar question is, what does a hitman do who no longer wants to be a hitman when all they know is being a hitman? That's what happened to me. I had 2 very hard years. Through this process of reinvention, nobody wanted to hire me because I was a sort of traitor to them by writing this book, when really I think the worst betrayal was to my values and my principles. I had to sell my house. I started from zero. At one point, I came to have my electricity shut off in my home because I couldn't pay the bill, but luckily I kept my health throughout. At the time I continue to have 2 children, one who's grown, and now I work in the fight against corruption based on that experience. And you realize that the fight against corruption is completely unequal in underdeveloped countries, because corruption creates a lot of resources, and those of us who are fighting corruption don't have a lot of resources, and it becomes both everybody and nobody's problem at the same time. Political interests in Peru and many other countries are fighting for power instead of bringing about the reforms that these countries need. I became aware of this. I used to direct a guild of business people fighting corruption, but I quit because I realized that personal interests that are in conflict with the larger interest of the country are not aligned with my interests. So now I give talks, I write, I'm an activist, I advocate against corruption, and that has given me a bit of prestige here in Lima. And I have been working to change the environment around me. And I always say, if I can change, anybody can change. If I can stop corrupting other people can too. And I just share my personal story, and it's also the story of somebody who's trying to fight against their environment. And I would like to end by sharing this story. regarding what is going on in Latin American society currently. Like I said, I have a younger son, one who is 27 and the other who is 14. And my 14-year-old son came to me not long ago and he said, I want to go out to a nightclub. And I said, no, you're not old enough to go to a nightclub. I also give talks to young people. And at that age, children are really interested in experimenting and getting to know the world. And so how could I say no when he just wants to experiment? But I said no. But continuing on in the conversation, I said, if I were to let you go, how are you going to get into a nightclub if you're not old enough? And he said to me, I can buy a fake ID. And so that's when I realized that our environment is more complicated than it appears. He's in a good school, a private school, upper middle class school. And I asked him, how are you going to buy a fake ID? He said, oh, there's no problem. All of my friends have fake IDs and their parents buy them their fake IDs. And so again, I realized that the fight against corruption is not just internal amongst ourselves, but against our environment. It starts with ourselves. I'm not an example of anything. I'm no angel. I'm just somebody who became aware and realized that it was important to make this change and to stop delaying and stop fighting this process. When I saw this situation my son was in, I said, this has to be something much bigger. This is not just about big politics or big businessmen, the justice system, or the corruption cases we see on TV. This is an example of everyday corruption. And when I realized that there are parents who are buying their children fake IDs so that they can go to nightclubs, then I saw that it really is something much bigger. Corruption is not a problem. It is a symptom of an underlying problem that we don't want to address. It touches on education and values among adults. Awareness, which also require well-crafted preventive laws. And the law has to be applied equally toward everybody, because when there is impunity, people know that they won't face punishment. And when there is no punishment, crime, whatever it may be, not just corruption, will spread because there is impunity. And so I wanted to share this true story. None of what I have told you about is made up or fictionalized. This is what I share in the talks that I give. And I just want to admit my error before you hear, being vulnerable, and share that anybody can change. Thank you very much for listening.